So we want to start to get our heads around something that's fundamentally random. And the best way to do that initially is to think of this idea of a random experiment. And a random experiment is sort of probably exactly what you think it is. It's something like flipping a coin or drawing a card, or we can think of basically any event that occurs as a sort of type of random experiment. And one of the the core properties of a random experiment is that it's got when we run a random experiment, we get a particular outcome. So we run this experiment and we observe that something in particular occurs, okay? But even though we observe only one particular occurrence when we run this random experiment, in reality, there are a variety of possible different outcomes that could have occurred. So we've got this idea of there being one outcome that happens when we run this experiment once, and a variety of outcomes that could have possibly happened, but which have not necessarily occurred. Okay. And so we denote, that is, we've got a special symbol for these outcomes that we use, and that is this little lowercase omega. And so omega is sort of like a W, but it's sort of got slightly curvier sides. And so any particular omega denotes one outcome. It does not denote a collection, it just denotes a single outcome. So if we thought about this random experiment as drawing a card from a deck, a particular outcome would be that I drew the ace of spades. Okay. And so we're going to try and get our head around this random experiment as a whole. And to do that, we're going to take all of these outcomes and we're going to put them together in a set. Okay? We're going to put them together in a set and we're going to call that set, we're going to denote it with, this is also omega, this is capital omega. Okay? And we're going to just sort of cheat and we're just going to write all of the outcomes. All of the outcomes here. So this is a set of all of the outcomes, all of our little lowercase omegas. Or using the notation we introduced in the previous video, we have all the omegas such that omega is an outcome of this particular experiment. And so we have outcomes, which are particular possibilities. We collect them all together, and we've got this capital omega, this set of all the possible outcomes. We've got a special name for that, and the special name for that set is the outcome space. The outcome space, which is also referred to as the sample space. Okay, but it's just the set of all the possible outcomes for this experiment. Okay. So let's go through a particular example. Well, I'm going to say my experiment is that I flipped two coins consecutively, and I observed whether there was a head or a tail. So I'm going to make my outcome space for this experiment, and each element is going to be an outcome. And so an outcome could be I got a heads and then I got a heads. I got a tail and then I got another tail. I got a tails and then I got a heads. And finally I got a heads and then I got a tail. And so each of these little pairs represents an outcome, and this whole set is the set of all possible outcomes. Given that we can only get a head or a tail, we can't have the coin land on its side. This is the set of all possible outcomes. This is the outcome space for this particular experiment. Okay, so this is just an example of what we can do. And so a convenient thing we might like to do is to represent sort of some, not just one, like a couple of these outcomes in a sort of a collective way. And so we want to say, okay, what if I just want to see all the outcomes where I got a heads first. Okay. And so we call that an event. And so we say A is an event when A is just some set, which is a subset of the outcome space. And so we can write here, we can write A, we can sort of all the outcomes where we got a head first. Okay. And I can write this sort of, I can write this out as I got a head tail and a head head. And we can check that this set A, as we've just drawn it, is in fact a subset of this set omega, the outcome space. We can see head tails is in A, and it's also in the outcome space, and head head is in A, and it's also in the outcome space. So we can see that A is a subset of this outcome space. And so in general, if we want to go back to our original drawing here, we can say this is an event. It's a collection of some outcomes. Okay. And so we've got this idea of omega being a particular outcome. And when we take all of the omegas together and put them in a set, we get the outcome space. Okay. And then when we just take some of the omegas together, that gives us an event. And in particular, an event will be a subset of the outcome space.